Lorenzo Vitti was a man who owned the city of Chicago. He had politicians in his pocket and judges on his payroll. But the one thing he didn't have was a clue that his own execution had been scheduled for a Tuesday night inside his own home. He wasn't supposed to be there. He was supposed to be in London. But when he walked through his front door a day early, the silence was deafening. He expected a greeting. Instead, he found Sophie, the shy cleaning maid, standing in the dark hallway, trembling. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She pressed a single finger to her lips and whispered 2 words that saved his life. "Stay silent." What Lorenzo heard next from the top of the stairs didn't just break his heart. It shattered his entire reality. The rain in Chicago didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Lorenzo Vitti watched the wipers slap against the windshield of his black Mercedes S-Class. He was alone, a rarity for the head of the Vitti crime family. Usually he traveled with a convoy, a wall of muscle and Kevlar. But tonight was different. Tonight was about fatigue. He had told everyone, including his wife, Veronica, and his consigliere, Luca, that the negotiations in London would take 3 days. But the deal with the Albanians had collapsed within 3 hours. Disgusted and exhausted, Lorenzo had taken the private jet back, immediately bypassing his security detail at the airport. He wanted the one thing his money usually couldn't buy: quiet. He pulled up to the iron gates of the Blackwood estate. No, wait, not Blackwood. He hated that name. The Vitti estate. The gates recognized his transponder and swung open silently. The driveway was a long ribbon of wet asphalt winding through manicured oaks. The house loomed ahead, a Georgian monster of brick and stone, dark against the stormy sky. Lorenzo parked around the back near the garage entrance, avoiding the gravel crunch of the main drive. He wanted to surprise Veronica. They had been arguing lately about his hours, about the danger, about the possibility of having children. He had bought a diamond choker in London, a peace offering. He touched the velvet box in his jacket pocket as he killed the engine. The house was dark. That was strange. It was only 9:10 p.m. Usually the ground floor was lit up. Veronica hated the dark. Lorenzo unlocked the back service door with his key. The heavy oak door swung inward without a sound. He paid a man specifically to oil every hinge in this house monthly. He stepped into the mudroom, shaking the rain from his coat. The smell of the house hit him, lemon polish old wood, and the faint, expensive scent of lilies Veronica insisted on having in the foyer. He moved into the kitchen. Empty. The stainless steel appliances gleamed under the moonlight filtering through the windows. He frowned. Where was the night staff? Where was Mrs. Gable, the cook? Where was the security detail that was supposed to be rotating the perimeter? A cold prickle of instinct danced down his spine. It was the same feeling he'd had in a warehouse in 1998, right before our ambush. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. Pregnant. Lorenzo loosened his tie and unbuttoned his suit jacket, his hand instinctively hovering near the Sig Sauer P226 holstered under his left arm. He walked softly, his Italian leather shoes making no sound on the marble floor of the hallway leading to the grand foyer. He turned the corner and froze. A figure stood in the shadows of the grand staircase. Lorenzo's hand snapped to his gun, drawing it in a blur of motion. "Don't move," he hissed. The figure gasped, stepping into the sliver of moonlight cast by the transom window. It was Sophie, the maid. She was young, perhaps 24, with wide, terrified doe eyes and a uniform that looked too big for her slight frame. She was clutching a feather duster like a weapon, her knuckles white. Lorenzo lowered the gun slightly, but didn't holster it. He knew everyone who worked for him, but Sophie was new hired maybe 3 months ago. She was quiet, efficient, and usually invisible. "Sophie," Lorenzo said, his voice a low rumble. "Where is everyone? Why are the lights off?" Sophie didn't answer immediately. Her eyes darted from his face to the top of the stairs, then back to him. She was trembling so violently that he could hear the soft rattle of the duster handle against her buttons. "Mr. Vitti," she breathed, her voice barely audible. You're in London." "Plans changed," Lorenzo said, taking a step forward. "Where is my wife? Where is the security team?" Sophie's eyes went wide. She took a frantic step toward him, abandoning all protocol. She reached out her cold hand, grabbing his expensive lapel, pulling him into the alcove beneath the stairs. "Hey!" Lorenzo began, annoyed. "Shh!" Sophie hissed, the sound sharp like a whip crack. She looked terrified, tears welling in her eyes. She pressed a finger to her lips, her eyes pleading with him. "Please, sir, not a word. Stay silent." Lorenzo frowned, his annoyance warring with his instincts. He was the boss. No one hushed him. But the terror in her eyes was genuine. This wasn't a prank. This was fear of death. "Why?" he whispered, leaning in close, his gun still in his hand. Sophie pointed a shaking finger toward the ceiling, toward the master bedroom on the second floor. "Because," she whispered, her voice cracking, "they are celebrating your funeral." Lorenzo felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him cold and focused. The funeral comment didn't make sense, but the tension in the air was undeniable. He signaled Sophie to stay put in the alcove. He removed his shoes, leaving them on the marble. In his socks, he was a ghost. He crept up the grand staircase, sticking to the edges where the wood was most supported and least likely to creak. The house was a tomb, but as he reached the landing, he heard it. Voices, coming from the master bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, spilling a beam of warm golden light across the dark hallway. Lorenzo moved to the wall, pressing his back against the silk wallpaper. He inched closer to the doorframe. "Worried about the timeline, Luca. If the plane lands in London and he doesn't check in at the hotel, the terrifying contacts he has over there will start making calls." It was Veronica. Her voice wasn't the shrill, complaining tone she had used with Lorenzo for the past year. It was smooth, calculating, and calm. Lorenzo's grip on his gun tightened until his knuckles ached. Luca Moretti, his underboss. The man Lorenzo had pulled out of the gutter paid for his mother's surgery and promoted over his own cousins. Luca was the godfather to Lorenzo's sister's kids. A deep laugh rumbled from the room. "Relax, V. The pilot is on my payroll. The plane landed an hour ago. The manifest says Lorenzo Vitti disembarked. As far as the world knows, he's in a cab to the Savoy right now." "And the actual Lorenzo?" Veronica asked. The sound of ice clinking against glass drifted out. They were drinking his scotch. The 30-year-old Macallan he saved for anniversaries. "The actual Lorenzo is currently at the bottom of the Atlantic," Luca said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Or he will be once the timer on the pressure valve I had installed on the jet's hydraulic line malfunctions on his return trip. But why wait? I prefer the narrative that he disappeared in London. It makes him look weak, careless." Lorenzo stopped breathing. He closed his eyes for a second, fighting the urge to storm the room and empty the magazine. They thought he was dead. or they had planned for him to die on the way back. By coming home early commercial, he had inadvertently dodged a bomb, literally or metaphorically. "I don't care how he dies, Luca." Veronica sighed. "I just want the papers signed. I want the estate. I want the accounts." "You'll get them," Luca said, the sound of shifting fabric. "Once he's declared missing, you have power of attorney. We liquidate the offshore holdings, blame it on a rival family, maybe the Romanos, and start a war. In the chaos, we take over." "And the staff?" Veronica asked. "Sophie saw me let you in the back gate." Lorenzo's heart hammered against his ribs. He looked back toward the stairs. Sophie was still there, watching him from the shadows below. "Sophie is a loose end," Luca said casually, as if discussing a broken lamp. "She's a mute little mouse, but mice squeak. After we're done here, I'll go downstairs. I'll tell her Lorenzo called and needs her to run an errand. I'll take her for a drive. She won't come back." Rage, hot and blinding, flooded Lorenzo's vision. They were going to kill the girl just for being there. "Make it clean," Veronica said. "I don't want blood on the carpets. I just had them redone." Lorenzo had heard enough. He had the element of surprise. He had a gun. He could kick open that door and end Luca and Veronica right now. It would be justice. It would be satisfying. He raised the weapon, preparing to pivot around the doorframe. Suddenly, a hand clamped over his wrist. Lorenzo nearly fired, spinning around. It was Sophie. She had crept up the stairs behind him, silent as smoke. She shook her head frantically, her eyes wide with urgency. She pulled on his arm, dragging him away from the door. He tried to shake her off, mouthing, "I can take them." Sophie pulled a small object from her apron pocket and held it up to his face. It was a smartphone displaying a live video feed. Lorenzo squinted at the screen. It showed the exterior of the house. Men in tactical gear were swarming the lawn. They weren't his men. They wore black armbands, Luca's personal crew. There were at least 20 of them. Sophie tapped the screen and swiped. Another camera angle. The hallway downstairs. 2 men with assault rifles were already entering through the front door he had just walked through. If Lorenzo fired his gun now, he would kill Luca and Veronica, but he would be trapped in the bedroom. Luca's hit squad would swarm the stairs and cut him to pieces within seconds. He was outmanned, outgunned, and trapped in his own fortress. Sophie tugged his arm again, pointing toward the end of the hallway, toward the servants' quarters. Lorenzo looked at the bedroom door one last time. He could hear Veronica laughing, a soft, throaty sound he used to love. He memorized the sound. He would use it as fuel later. He holstered his gun and nodded to Sophie. She turned and sprinted silently down the hall, Lorenzo close on her heels. They reached the linen closet at the end of the hall. Sophie opened it, pushed aside stacks of Egyptian cotton sheets, and pressed a hidden panel in the back wall. Lorenzo blinked. He had built this house. He knew every inch of it. He didn't know there was a passage behind the linen closet. "Who are you?" Lorenzo whispered as the panel clicked open, revealing a narrow, dusty chute. Sophie didn't look like a terrified maid anymore. Her posture had shifted. She looked sharp, alert. "Someone who wants to live," she whispered. "Get in. They're coming." The space behind the wall was tight, smelling of dry rot and insulation. Sophie pulled the panel shut, just as the heavy thud of boots echoed on the hardwood floor of the hallway they had just vacated. "Check the rooms," a voice shouted. It wasn't Luca. It was one of the mercenaries. "The boss's car is in the back. The hood is warm. He's here." Lorenzo pressed himself against the rough brick of the chimney chase. It was pitch black. He could hear Sophie breathing next to him, controlled, rhythmic breaths, not the breathing of a panicked civilian. "There's a ladder," Sophie whispered, her voice close to his ear. "It goes down to the old coal cellar, the one boarded up in the 90s. "I renovated the basement," Lorenzo whispered back. "There is no coal cellar." "There is," she insisted. "The previous owner, Mr. Calloway, was a bootlegger. He walled it off. I found the blueprints in the library when I was dusting." Lorenzo felt a strange mix of admiration and suspicion. "You memorize blueprints while dusting?" "I read everything," she said simply. "Move. They have thermal scopes. This wall is thick, but it won't hide our heat signature forever." Lorenzo followed her down the rusted iron rungs. The darkness was absolute. He had to trust her. He had to trust the maid who brought him coffee every morning and whose last name he couldn't even recall. Miller Smith. They descended about 30 feet. The air grew colder and damper. Finally, his feet hit dirt. Sophie clicked on a small pen light, shielding the beam with her hand. They were in a narrow brick tunnel, cobwebs hanging like heavy drapes. "This leads to the drainage output near the creek," Sophie said, moving quickly. "It's a half-mile out." "Wait," Lorenzo said, grabbing her shoulder. He stopped her. "Why are you helping me, Sophie?" "You heard them. They want to kill you to tie up loose ends. You could have run out the back door while I went upstairs. Why come back for me?" Sophie turned, the pen light illuminating her face from below, casting long shadows. "Because Mr. Vitti, my brother, worked for the Romanos. He died in a crossfire 3 years ago. You sent my mother a check to cover the funeral. You didn't know who we were, but you paid for it because a bystander got hit." Lorenzo frowned, searching his memory. He vaguely remembered the incident. A botched hit on a rival. Collateral damage. He always paid for collateral damage. It was the one rule of his code. "I didn't do it for charity," Lorenzo said harshly. "It was business. It saved my mother's home," Sophie said. "And besides, I saw what Luca did to the previous maid who refused his advances. I'd rather take my chances with the devil I know." "Fair enough," Lorenzo grunted. "Let's move." They jogged through the tunnel, the ground slick with sludge. Lorenzo's mind was racing. He had no phone. He had left it in the car to avoid tracking. He had 1 gun and 2 magazines. He had a maid with a feather duster and a pen light. And outside, Luca had an army. "We need a vehicle," Lorenzo said, as they saw moonlight ahead. The tunnel opened up into a drainage ditch, covered by heavy, overgrown vines. "My car is burned. They'll have the perimeter locked down." "I have a car," Sophie said. Lorenzo looked at her. "You have a car. A 2015 Honda Civic," she said. "Parked on the service road a mile east. I don't park on the property, because the security chief says it's an eyesore." "A Honda Civic," Lorenzo repeated. The absurdity of the situation almost made him laugh. The King of Chicago was going to escape a coup in a hatchback. "Lead the way." They crawled out of the drainage pipe. The rain had stopped, but the wind was howling. They were at the edge of the property line, separated from the main road by a dense patch of woods. "Get down!" Lorenzo hissed, shoving Sophie into the mud. A spotlight swept over their heads. A drone. Lorenzo watched the buzzing device hover above the trees. Luca was thorough. He was using thermal drones. "They know we're out," Lorenzo whispered. "We have maybe 5 minutes before they sweep these woods." "Can you shoot it?" Sophie asked. "If I shoot, I give away our position," Lorenzo said. "We have to move under the canopy." They scrambled through the underbrush thorns, tearing at Lorenzo's suit and Sophie's uniform. They moved fast, driven by adrenaline. After 10 minutes of grueling terrain, they reached the old service road. There it was, a beat-up silver Honda Civic. It looked like the most beautiful chariot Lorenzo had ever seen. Sophie fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking again now that the immediate physical exertion had paused. She dropped them. "Calm down," Lorenzo said, his voice steady. He picked up the keys. "I'll drive." "No," Sophie said, snatching them back. "You don't know how to start it. The starter is tricky. You have to wiggle the key." She unlocked the door. They dove inside. Sophie jammed the key in, wiggled it violently, and turned. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died. "Sophie," Lorenzo warned. I know," she cried, trying again. Cough, sputter, vroom. The engine roared to life. Sophie slammed it into drive and peeled out onto the asphalt just as 3 black SUVs tore around the corner behind them, high beams blinding in the rearview mirror. "Hold on," Sophie yelled. "Drive," Lorenzo shouted. "Go, go!" Bullets pinged off the rear bumper. The back windshield shattered, showering them in glass. Sophie screamed but kept her foot pinned to the floor. The little Honda whined in protest as it hit 80 miles per hour. "Where are we going?" Sophie yelled over the wind rushing through the broken window. Lorenzo looked back. The SUVs were gaining. They were heavier, faster, and armored. "We can't outrun them," Lorenzo said, checking his gun. "And we can't go to my associates. I don't know who else Luca has turned. If he has Veronica, he likely has the captains too." "Then where?" Lorenzo looked at the maid. She was driving like a getaway driver, her face set in grim determination. "Take the next exit," Lorenzo said. "We're going to the one place Luca will never look." "Where is that?" "The Romanos," Lorenzo said. "My enemies." Sophie looked at him like he was insane. "You want to drive to the rival family's house? They'll kill you on sight." "They might," Lorenzo said, watching the headlights of the pursuit vehicles grow larger. "But Luca is trying to frame them for my death. If I show up alive at their doorstep, I become their proof of innocence. It's a gamble. It's suicide. It's politics," Lorenzo said coldly. "Turn the wheel, Sophie." Sophie yanked the wheel hard to the right. The Honda screeched, drifting onto the off-ramp, narrowly missing the guardrail. The SUVs behind them struggled to make the turn, one of them clipping the barrier and spinning out. Lorenzo sat back, brushing glass off his shoulder. He looked at Sophie. "You drive well for a maid," he noted. Sophie didn't look at him. Her knuckles were white on the wheel. "I have 4 brothers, Mr. Vitti. We grew up racing on dirt tracks, and my name isn't Sophie." Lorenzo raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what is it then?" She glanced at him, and for the first time he saw a spark of something dangerous in her eyes. "It's Leo," she said. "Leona. And we have a problem. The check engine light just came on." Lorenzo looked at the dashboard. It wasn't just the check engine light. The temperature gauge was redlining. A bullet must have hit the radiator. "We aren't making it to the Romanos," Lorenzo said grimly. "Pull over into that abandoned factory up ahead. We make our stand there." "With one gun?" Leona asked. "No," Lorenzo said, reaching under his seat and pulling out a tire iron he had spotted earlier. "With one gun and a lot of anger. Welcome to the family, kid." The Honda Civic died with a wheezing shudder rolling into the dark cavern of the abandoned textile factory. The headlights flickered and died, plunging Lorenzo and Leona into a heavy industrial silence. The rain hammered against the corrugated tin roof high above, creating a cacophony that masked the sound of their heavy breathing. "Out!" Lorenzo commanded, kicking his door open. "They'll be here in 30 seconds. Leona scrambled out, clutching her side. She had been bruised during the wild drive, but her adrenaline was keeping the pain at bay. The factory was a maze of rusted looms, decaying conveyor belts and pillars of concrete that looked like the rib cage of a leviathan. "Upstairs," Lorenzo whispered, pointing to a metal gantry overlooking the main floor. "High ground. We make them come to us." They sprinted toward the rusted stairs. Lorenzo moved with the grace of a predator, despite his Italian suit being ruined and his shoes caked in mud. Leona followed her maid's uniform, torn her hair a wild halo around her face. They reached the catwalk just as the factory entrance exploded inward. 2 black SUVs smashed through the rotting wooden doors, their high beams cutting through the dusty air like searchlights. Tires screeched on the concrete floor as the vehicles drifted to a halt. Doors flew open and 6 men spilled out. They were professional. No shouting, just hand signals and the terrifying click of safety catches being disengaged. Lorenzo pulled Leona down behind a heavy steel generator housing on the catwalk. He checked his Sig Sauer. 7 rounds left in the magazine, 1 spare mag, 15 shots, 6 men with automatic rifles and body armor. The math was fatal. "Stay down," Lorenzo breathed into her ear. "Do not move unless I tell you." "They have night vision," Leona whispered back, her voice trembling but clear. "I saw the goggles." "I know," Lorenzo said. He looked around the catwalk. He needed an equalizer. His eyes landed on a massive breaker box on the wall near them, the door hanging off its hinges. The wires were thick copper veins, stripped bare by scavengers, but the main conduit looked intact. "Leona," Lorenzo said, "see that lever? That's the emergency fire suppression system for the dye vats below. Do you think it still works?" "This place has been closed for 10 years, she whispered. "The water might be gone," Lorenzo said, "but the chemicals, the dye powder, it settles. If those sprinklers trigger even with air pressure, it'll create a cloud." "A smoke screen," she realized. "Wait for my signal." Below them, the mercenaries were sweeping the floor. They moved in a diamond formation, scanning the shadows. "Viti!" a voice boomed from the floor. It was a voice Lorenzo recognized. Rocco. A brute who used to work security for his casinos. "We know you're here. Luca just wants to talk. He says if you come down, the girl walks free." Lorenzo didn't answer. He aimed his pistol through the gap in the railing. He wasn't aiming at the men. He was aiming at a rusted 55-gallon drum sitting on a pallet near the SUVs. It was marked with a faded skull and crossbones. Acetone. Highly flammable industrial solvent used for cleaning machinery. "Now!" Lorenzo yelled. Leona yanked the rusted lever down with all her weight. A groan of pressurized metal echoed through the factory. Then with a hiss like 1,000 snakes, the overhead pipes burst open. It wasn't water that came out. It was a decade's worth of accumulated rust dust, stagnant water, and ancient chemical powder blasting out in a thick, choking brown fog. At the exact same moment, Lorenzo fired. Bang! The bullet sparked off the concrete, missing the drum. "Damn it!" Lorenzo cursed. The mercenaries looked up, their night vision flared out by the sudden cloud of debris. They opened fire blindly. Bullets sparked against the catwalk, whining like angry hornets. Lorenzo took a breath, steadied his hand, and fired again. Bang! The drum ruptured. The spark from the bullet entry ignited the fumes instantly. Boom! A fireball rolled across the factory floor, engulfing the front of the lead SUV. The mercenaries screamed, scrambling back as the concussion wave knocked them off their feet. The fire roared, casting long, dancing shadows that confused their night vision goggles. "Move!" Lorenzo grabbed Leona's hand. They didn't go down. They went up. Lorenzo led her toward the roof access ladder. The heat from below was rising fast. Smoke billowed up thick and black, providing them with cover. They burst onto the roof of the factory, the cold rain hitting them instantly. The Chicago skyline glowed in the distance, indifferent to their struggle. "We can't stay here," Leona gasped, coughing. "They'll surround the building." "We're not staying," Lorenzo said. He dragged her toward the edge of the roof where the factory abutted an old railway line. There was a 10-foot gap between the roof and the gravel embankment of the train tracks. "Jump," Lorenzo said. "Are you crazy?" Leona looked down. It was a 3-story drop if they missed. "Luca is downstairs," Lorenzo said, gripping her shoulders. "And he is not going to offer you a severance package. Jump." Lorenzo went first, launching himself into the void. He landed hard on the wet gravel, rolling to absorb the impact. He groaned, feeling a rib crack. He stood up and held out his arms. "Come on, Leona." She hesitated for a fraction of a second, looked back at the smoke pouring from the roof hatch, and jumped. She hit the slope, sliding down the wet rocks. Lorenzo caught her before she tumbled into the ravine. They lay there for a moment in the mud, gasping for air, the rain washing the soot from their faces. "You're insane." Leona laughed, a hysterical, jagged sound. "You are absolutely insane." "I'm alive," Lorenzo corrected, pulling her up. "And now we need a phone." He checked the pockets of his ruined suit. Nothing. But Leona reached into her bra and pulled out a small, waterproof burner phone. Lorenzo stared at her. "I told you," she said, wiping rain from her eyes. "My brother was in the life. I always carry a burner." Lorenzo took the phone. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. He dialed a number he had never written down, a number that belonged to a man who had wanted him dead for a decade. It rang 3 times. "Speak," a gravelly voice answered. "Salvatore," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to a dangerous baritone. "Don't hang up. It's Lorenzo Vitti." Silence on the other end. Then a low chuckle. "The ghost of Chicago. The news says you're missing, presumed dead in a plane crash over the Atlantic." "The news is wrong," Lorenzo said. "I'm in the South District. I'm bleeding, I'm tired, and I'm standing in the rain. I want to make a deal." "Why shouldn't I just send my boys to finish what your own dog started?" Salvatore asked. "Because if you kill me, Luca gets the territory," Lorenzo said. "And you know Luca. He's reckless. He'll bring the feds down on all of us within 6 months. He has no code." Salvatore paused. "What are you offering?" "I'm offering you the crown," Lorenzo lied. "I just want the head of the man who took mine." "Meet me at the docks," Salvatore said. "Warehouse 4B. Come alone. If I see a shadow I don't like, my snipers will turn you into pink mist." "I'm bringing a girl," Lorenzo said. "A girl. My driver," Lorenzo said, glancing at Leona. "She's the only reason I'm breathing." "Fine. You have 20 minutes." The line went dead. Lorenzo looked at Leona. "Ready to meet the devil?" he asked. "I've been cleaning his house for 3 months," Leona said, smoothing her torn apron. "I think I can handle his neighbor." The docks were a graveyard of shipping containers and forgotten industry. Warehouse 4B was a fortress of corrugated steel surrounded by razor wire. Lorenzo and Leona approached on foot, their hands raised. Floodlights snapped on, blinding them. "Stop right there," a voice amplified by a loudspeaker boomed. Lorenzo stopped. He felt naked without his gun, which he had tossed into the weeds as a sign of good faith, a calculated risk that terrified him. 3 men emerged from the shadows. They weren't wearing tactical gear like Luca's mercenaries. They wore leather jackets and flat caps, old school. The Romano family prided themselves on tradition. They patted Lorenzo down roughly. One of them, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow, leered at Leona. "She's clean," the man grunted, stepping back. "Don Salvatore is waiting." They were led into the warehouse. Inside, it was set up like a tribunal. In the center sat a single ornate wooden chair, occupied by an elderly man with silver hair and eyes like polished flint. Salvatore Romano. He was flanked by 6 armed guards. Lorenzo walked to the center of the room, standing tall despite his exhaustion. Leona stood a step behind him to his right. "Lorenzo," Salvatore said, his voice echoing. "You look like hell." "I feel like it," Lorenzo admitted. "Thank you for seeing me. I haven't decided if I'm seeing you or executing you," Salvatore mused, tapping his fingers on the armrest. "You say Luca betrayed you." "Luca and Veronica," Lorenzo said. "They planned it for weeks. They thought I was in London." Salvatore nodded slowly. "And you come to me, your enemy." "You are an enemy with honor, Salvatore," Lorenzo said, playing to the old man's ego. "Luca is a rabid dog. If he takes my seat, he will come for your ports next. You know this." "Maybe," Salvatore shrugged. "Or maybe I kill you right now. Call Luca and trade your body for a percentage of his profits. Why should I fight a war for a dead man?" Lorenzo clenched his jaw. He had nothing left to bargain with except his territory, and even that was currently occupied. Suddenly, Leona stepped forward. "Because," she said, her voice ringing out, clear and loud, interrupting the 2 dons. Every gun in the room turned toward her. Lorenzo stiffened. "Leona, quiet." "No," she said, stepping in front of Lorenzo. She looked Salvatore dead in the eye. "You should fight this war because Luca Moretti is weak, and he is stupid." Salvatore raised an eyebrow. "The maid speaks." "I'm not just a maid," Leona said. "I'm the one who listens. I've cleaned Luca's office while he was on the phone. I've heard him talk about you, Don Romano." Salvatore leaned forward. "And what does he say?" "He calls you the relic," Leona lied smoothly. She didn't know if Luca actually said that, but she knew men like Luca. "He says your time is over. He says he has a contact in the DEA. He's planning to rat out your shipment coming in next Thursday, the one from Naples, to get the feds to clear the board for him." The room went deadly silent. Lorenzo looked at Leona in shock. He knew nothing about a shipment from Naples. It was a blind guess, a bluff. Salvatore's face darkened. The shipment from Naples was real. Only his inner circle knew about it. If this girl knew. "He said that," Salvatore hissed. "He laughed about it," Leona said, doubling down. "He said he'd use the feds to take you out, then buy your warehouses at auction for pennies on the dollar." Salvatore stood up, his face red with fury. He kicked the chair back. "That insolent little rat! I fed his father when he was starving." He turned to his lieutenant. "Enzo, get the boys. Everyone. I want every shooter we have ready in an hour." He turned back to Lorenzo. "You want your house back, Vitti?" "I want my life back," Lorenzo said. "We will give you your life," Salvatore said, "but the price is the north side, all of it, from the river to the tracks. That belongs to the Romanos now." It was a steep price. It was half of Lorenzo's empire, but without it, he had no empire at all. "Done," Lorenzo said without hesitation. "Good," Salvatore grunted. "Now how do we get you inside? The place will be a fortress." Lorenzo looked at Leona. She was trembling slightly now, the adrenaline fading, but her eyes were sharp. "We don't storm the gates,"